All right, let's dive into one of history's most incredible stories, the rise of Islam. We're going to unpack how a single voice in the desert managed to unite all of Arabia in just 23 years. I mean, think about that. How does something like that even happen? Let's find out.
So yeah, that's the big question we're tackling. How does one man in the middle of the desert spark a movement that becomes a global power in just over 2 decades? It's not a simple story. It's filled with persecution, nail-biting escapes, battles against impossible odds, and some seriously clever strategy. This is a story that literally changed the map of the world. Okay, so before we can even get into the message itself, we have to set the scene. You have to understand the world that this message was born into. And according to the source material, it was a pretty brutal and chaotic place.
So take a look at this. We're talking about Arabia, about 1,500 years ago. This was a world defined by nonstop tribal warfare. Hundreds of different idols were being worshipped, even right inside the sacred Kaaba in Mecca. And the sources point to some really harsh practices, like the burying of infant daughters. It's into this world, this darkness, that a completely revolutionary new voice is about to emerge. And that voice belongs to Muhammad. He was born in Mecca, orphaned pretty young, but he built this reputation for being incredibly honest and trustworthy. He even married a respected businesswoman, Khadijah. For years, he was just a respected member of his community. But then, at 40 years old, everything changed. While he was meditating in a cave, he received his first revelation. And that moment, that was the start of a 23-year journey that would completely alter the course of history.
So you can probably guess how this radical new message went over, right? When you challenge the entire social, religious, and economic order of a place like Mecca, that is a very dangerous thing to do. And it absolutely triggered a period of intense, brutal persecution. The first Muslims were suddenly fighting for their very survival.
Yeah, the reaction was immediate and incredibly harsh. You have Mecca's powerful elite, guys like Abu Jahl and Abu Sufyan, and they see this new message, one God, no idols, as a direct threat to their power, to their wealth, to the whole system that benefited them. So the early followers were tortured, systematically. And the Prophet himself, he was living with constant threats on his life.
And then came the year 619 AD. This year became known as the Year of Sorrow, and for good reason. It was just a devastating blow. In a short span of time, the Prophet lost his wife, Khadijah, who was his biggest emotional and financial supporter, and his uncle, Abu Talib, who was his political protector in the tribe. With both of them gone, he was left completely exposed. The plots to kill him got a lot more serious.
It all came to a head when a full-blown assassination plot was hatched. At that point, a desperate escape was the only option left. It's an incredible story. The Prophet's cousin, Ali, literally risked his life sleeping in the Prophet's bed as a decoy to buy him time. Under the cover of night, the Prophet and his closest companion, Abu Bakr, slipped out of the city. For 3 agonizing days, they hid in a cave as search parties swarmed the desert looking for them. Miraculously, they made it to the city of Medina, where they were welcomed. This journey, the Hijra, was so monumental that it marks the very beginning of the Islamic calendar. It's day 1.
But just getting out of Mecca didn't mean they were safe, not by a long shot. The leaders back in Mecca were furious, and they were determined to crush this new community before it could grow. What comes next is a series of do-or-die battles that would test this new faith to its absolute breaking point.
Just 2 years later, you get the first major showdown, the Battle of Badr. And I mean, just look at these numbers. The odds are just insane. The Muslims have just over 300 men, a handful of swords, 2 horses. That's it. And they're up against a well-armed Meccan army of 1,000. On paper, this should have been a complete wipeout.
But against all logic, against all odds, the tiny Muslim force wins. And it's not just a win, it's a decisive victory. Their #1 persecutor, Abu Jahl, is killed, and the Meccan army is sent running. Now, the source explains this stunning turnaround by saying that angels were sent to fight alongside the believers. For the Muslims, the victory at Badr was this huge psychological turning point. It proved they weren't just victims anymore. They were a force you had to take seriously.
Well, you can imagine the Meccans were absolutely humiliated, and they wanted revenge. A year later, they came back, this time with an army of 3,000. And the battle that took place next, the Battle of Uhud, would become a very, very painful lesson in why you always follow orders.
So the entire battle hinged on one critical moment. The Prophet had placed 50 archers on a hill overlooking the battlefield. Their job was to protect the army's rear flank. and their orders were crystal clear. Do not move. No matter what happens, stay put. But when it looked like the Meccans were retreating, most of the archers couldn't resist. They broke rank and ran down the hill to grab the spoils of war. And that's when the brilliant Meccan general, a man named Khalid bin Walid, saw his chance. He wheeled his cavalry around and smashed into the now unprotected rear flank. The whole battle just flipped in an instant, and the Muslims suffered devastating losses, including the death of the Prophet's own uncle Hamza.
But the Meccans still weren't finished. Their next move was the big one, an all-out attempt to just end this once and for all. They gathered a massive coalition, a huge confederation of different tribes, with one goal: lay siege to Medina and wipe the Muslims off the map. Okay, so now you've got 3,000 Muslims inside Medina and an army of 10,000 outside ready to attack. They needed something new, something radical. And the idea came from a Persian companion named Salman al-Farsi. He suggested a tactic that was totally unknown in Arabia: digging a giant defensive trench. So that's what they did. They worked day and night digging this huge trench to protect the city. And when that massive army finally showed up, their greatest weapon, their cavalry, was completely useless. They were literally stopped dead in their tracks.
The whole thing grinds to a halt. It's a stalemate. The attackers are getting frustrated, so they send out their greatest warrior, a guy named Amr bin Abd Wud. This man was a legend, feared all across Arabia. He manages to get across the trench and basically dares anyone to fight him one-on-one. And there's just silence. No one wants to face this guy, except for one person, the Prophet's young cousin Ali.
So you have this classic David and Goliath showdown, the fearsome giant champion versus the young challenger. And in a stunning turn of events, Ali wins the duel. He defeats the champion. And that single moment of single combat completely shatters the morale of the entire invading army. That, combined with some bad weather and fighting amongst themselves, and the whole confederation just fell apart. The siege was over. This was the last time Mecca would try to destroy them with military force.
All right, the next major turning point in our story doesn't happen with swords, but with words, at a negotiating table. A few years go by and the Prophet leads a group of about 1,500 followers on a peaceful pilgrimage back towards Mecca. They're stopped before they can enter, and what comes out of the negotiations is a treaty that, honestly, on the surface looked like a total humiliating defeat for the Muslims. I mean, just look at the terms they had to agree to. A 10-year truce, sure, but they have to turn around and go home. No pilgrimage this year. And then there's this clause, which was just infuriating to the Muslims. If anyone from Mecca converts and escapes to Medina, they have to be sent back. But if a Muslim renounces their faith and flees to Mecca, oh, the Meccans get to keep them. As you can imagine, the followers were furious. They saw it as a complete surrender. But the Prophet calmly accepted the terms.
And this is where you see the absolute 4D chess playing out. Almost immediately, a new convert named Abu Basir escapes from Mecca and makes his way to Medina. And the Prophet, true to the treaty, tells him, "I'm sorry, I have to send you back." But on the journey back, Abu Basir escapes from his guards again. Now here's the kicker. Where can he go? The treaty itself says he's not allowed in Medina. He's stuck.
So what does he do? He sets up his own little camp, right on the main trade route for the Meccan caravans. And soon, other escaped converts who also can't go to Medina join him. They form this rogue band of fighters and start raiding every single Meccan trade caravan that passes by, basically strangling the city's entire economy. It got so bad that the Meccans themselves came to the Prophet and begged him to please cancel that clause and take Abu Basir and his men into Medina just so they could get their trade routes back. The Meccans were forced to undo their own victory. Absolutely brilliant.
That treaty, which seemed like such a loss, actually created a period of peace. And in that peace, the message of Islam just exploded. People could hear it without the constant threat of war. So many people converted that the balance of power in Arabia began to shift, and shift fast. This sets the stage for the final, dramatic chapter of this story. And you can see the momentum in these last few years. It's just unstoppable. The powerful fortress of Khyber is conquered. A small Muslim army of 3,000 takes on a massive Roman army of 100,000 at Muta. And then, the moment of truth, Meccan allies break the treaty. This time, the Prophet marches on Mecca not as an exile, but at the head of an army of 10,000. And the city that threw him out, that tried to kill him, it surrenders peacefully. And in his moment of ultimate victory, he does something incredible. He declares a general amnesty for everyone, total forgiveness. Just 2 years later, having finally united the entire Arabian Peninsula under one banner, the Prophet Muhammad passed away.
So, let's just recap. In 23 years, a small, persecuted group of followers went from being hunted in the desert to uniting all of Arabia. But now, their leader, their prophet, their founder is gone. The movement is facing its biggest test yet. And it leaves us with a huge, lingering question. What happens now? What becomes of this new power, now ready to step onto the world stage?